Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. You got to be in it to win it. And hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is getting started with runtime security on Azure Kubernetes service. Our speaker today is Eric Carter, who's Director of Product Marketing at Sysdig. Eric, welcome back to the webinar. So great to see you.
Yeah, likewise, Charlene. Appreciate it. Glad to be back talking about a new topic here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I am going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and let you get right to your presentation.
Excellent. Thanks for the intro, and that sounds good. Again, I'm Eric Carter. I am Director of Product and Partner Marketing here at Sysdig. I really focus on our ecosystem partners. So Microsoft is one of those, and that's kind of why we want to be here talking today about some of the things that you should consider around securing containers on Azure Kubernetes service and the service itself. We're a long-time Microsoft partner, and we're happy to kind of be out in the new year talking about what's the latest here. So why don't we go ahead and push forward? I'm going to do a little bit of kind of setup, kind of what's happening in the market, what's AKS or Azure Kubernetes Service all about, what's runtime security, and then we'll dive in, kind of culminating in a demo toward the end so that you can see in action some of the things that I've introduced. So let's move forward. This is kind of what I'll call the major setup slide, and I don't think anyone would argue with what they're seeing on the screen here, that Kubernetes has kind of won the war, has become the default OS for cloud. And so we see across cloud providers, even in our on-prem data centers and so on, that Kubernetes is being deployed. Project teams within organizations and enterprises are looking to get onto those platforms and to start doing things around DevOps, around things like CI/CD and packaging their code now in containers. And part of why that's the dynamic is because all of these organizations in today's business climate really want to find ways to speed innovation. And what we found with this set of technologies, Kubernetes, containers, cloud, is that we can do that. We can do that much more quickly than we ever did before. We release code many times a day versus once a month or greater in the past, right? And along with that drives some efficiency, not just for our people and for our developers, but for our infrastructure, for our business in general. So a lot of things that are causing us to kind of take all of the things you see on the left here, start breaking them up into microservices and start running them in the cloud. And so with that, cloud providers like Microsoft have developed their own Kubernetes services. So Azure Kubernetes Service, again known as AKS for short, is a managed Kubernetes service on Microsoft Azure. Now, what's this all about? Can't you just run your own Kubernetes, get it off of GitHub or whatnot? Sure, you can, but there's kind of this concept of, do I want to manage the infrastructure? Do I want to manage the control plane in addition to the data plane? Or what if I could just show up and start developing and pushing containers live and let someone else worry about the management and operations of Kubernetes? Really, that's what AKS is bringing to you. I took some of these bullets directly from a Microsoft presentation and kind of emphasized what to expect when you're leveraging this as a solution versus building your own. It's about automation of things like upgrades and patches, reliability, availability, and so on, right? So it's a great service, and we have lots of customers who are taking advantage of it. And so really today, our goal is to talk about some of the dynamics that we see with containers, with these cloud platforms, with security, and how it all plays together. One of the exciting things that just actually yesterday happened was our release of our 2021 Container Security and Usage Report. And I say our, it is Sysdig's in the sense that we as a SaaS service have access to look at the behavior patterns and the activities of our customers. And from that, we can generate various data sets to understand what's the state of the art. And so this was released yesterday. I've included a link down there. Frankly, if you just go to our blog, you'll be able to get your own copy. 3 stats that I picked from this, just as a way to kind of get into why runtime security matters. Top one talks with image scanning, which is more of security in the build pipeline, that 74% of customers are now making sure that they're scanning images, which means looking inside the containers that they're building and looking for vulnerabilities, but doing that now also in the CI/CD build stage. So I'm a developer, I've put it into this pipeline. Microsoft has like Azure pipelines, we've got Jenkins, we got other solutions. And while it's going through that, we can do these checks. The idea is that we want to find where there are known issues and fix them before we even get pushed to a registry and get pushed into production. So this is a good number, actually. You would think 100% would be better. Of course it would be, but previously this was a much, much lower number. So in terms of securing the build pipeline, and a lot of folks refer to that as, we're shifting security left, meaning all the way back to the development stage. Things are improving, things are in pretty good shape. Having said that, one of the things that you can check for during that stage is the kind of configuration of your container images. And one of the things to watch out for is that containers, when they're just sort of pulled off of Docker Hub or wherever you might be getting them, usually are set by default as root. What does that mean? That means all the privileges, and that leads to the possibility that someone could connect and use that container to sort of break out in a privilege escalation, right? So it's typically the best practice to kind of go set the permissions in your container from what was the default, limit those permissions, don't run as root, right? And then go to production. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we can check these things in vulnerability image scanning, but we also want to be able to check this during runtime, meaning when those things are executed. And a lot of folks either aren't doing that or just it hasn't risen to their awareness. And so they're a little bit at risk here. Now, the last stat is about the lifespan of containers. Now, what's interesting is that we always have known that containers can spin up and down rather easily, but what tends to be happening now is almost 50% are living less than 5 minutes. Can present an issue if you're trying to police the behavior and activity with those containers and you don't have real-time visibility. So we'll get into how you're going to solve that. But just kind of 3 things to think about as we look at runtime security for AKS. So what is runtime? And every time when I was preparing for this presentation, when I thought about the word runtime, this image kept coming in my head. Well, runtime, when the bear is staring you down, it's probably runtime. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we want to talk about is what is container runtime or container runtime security. And you can think about runtime as sort of that execution environment when I'm actually running those containers in this application environment, it's production. And container runtime security is about providing or putting in place workflows for protecting and observing what's happening for those running containers, right? And the tool sets we're going to talk about today is all about analyzing that activity, not just the container, although that's important, and we'll talk about the challenges with that in just a second, but the hosts they're running on, which could be in the cloud, obviously, the network connections that are being made between containers, the files that are being touched, etc. So there's all of these things that you should be policing so that you're sure, even inside the walls of your own sort of data center or cloud space, you should be looking for. And runtime security goes beyond just detection, but also, we think about prevention as well. What can we do to not only identify, but to block unknown, unexpected, or unwanted behavior? So it is a key workflow for securing production containers, as it says here. And I'm going to focus on this area. You know, there's a whole spectrum of things you could be doing around security, and today we want to talk about sort of this very specific topic. All right, so once we're in this mode and we're pushing from our registries, we're getting in live on AKS, here are some challenges you'll face, and I've just posed them as questions specifically. What is one challenge? Well, what's happening inside a container? By nature, they're opaque. It's a bit of a black box. You can see on your Linux host or your cloud node that this container is running, but what's happening inside? And so you need to find ways, especially when thinking about runtime security, for understanding the behavior, because it can be very easy for someone to go in, for instance, and start running commands in a container, and can you see that? So we'll talk about ways to solve that. Where is it happening? Another challenge, right? So no longer am I just tied to a particular host name 1, right? My containers that make up my service may be running across any number of nodes and running on node 1 today and spun up on node 2 in an hour from now. So where it's happening, to answer that question, you need context. And so when we're discovering information about our environment and about our running containers, we want to provide context with that, right? So pair the two together. The power is in the information, not just that something happened, but where it happened in Kubernetes, what namespace, what pod, and so on. And we'll talk about how that happens. And where did it go? Where did it go speaks to the nature of the ephemerality, there's a big word, of containers, right? As I mentioned, almost half of containers that we observed were running less than 5 minutes. When containers spin up and then spin down, the nature of containers is that they're simply gone. And if you needed to have some details and data about what it was that happened during that 5 minute or less runtime, do you have it? What is going to be the challenge of actually getting that information? If you're not doing extensive logging and so on, you may have nothing, right? And so it's important to kind of implement a way to do that, and we'll talk in short today, not in super detail, but about one of the ways that Sysdig helps solve that problem. So these are the challenges that we're looking to address with what we're talking about today. All right, I'm jumping right down into some of the plumbing. I mentioned the visibility issue with containers, and that's what we're going to speak to right now. So when we think about runtime security for Azure containers or any containers, here we have our node that's running. It's a virtual machine in Azure. We've got containers running. Maybe they're speaking together or working as a team, or maybe they're individual. Now, how do we see potentially what's happening on the inside? The solution that Sysdig has come up with some time ago, and our founder being one of the co-creators of Wireshark, this kind of comes from his heritage of understanding how to capture details and data and have that for analyzing what's really happening. He took a step back and said, what do all these containers share? Well, they all share that they're running system calls and communicating with the host through Linux and through Linux kernel. So what if we could tap into that, right? And so tapping into that, there's a few ways to do it. Linux has something called eBPF, Extended Berkeley Packet Filter. It's way beyond packets, but it's a way to actually look at activity at a system call level. Sysdig has engineered a way to do this in addition to eBPF. We can do both with what we call our kernel module. And the idea is that when these containers are communicating, I start for the first time, can we identify from that what it is? What's the workloads? What are the payloads? What are the processes? What other containers is container 1 talking to? And yes, indeed, you can. And the nice thing about this is that you're not packing a container full of some sort of code to try and provide this information or capture this information, because the golden rule here is that containers should be sort of pristine, designed to run a process. That way you can update it and spin it up very quickly and so on. So if we're tapping into those system calls, we can observe runtime events from that syscall data. And so one of the ways that we take advantage of that is not just to observe it, but to do some filtering with that. And this entire kind of process we call container vision. So many of the things that those containers are doing are perfectly fine. Nothing wrong here. Other things might be worthy of capturing, filtering, setting an alarm, an alert, doing something. So we look at that information at the system call level. We filter it with rules. What you see on the left, that little falcon, I'll talk about Falco in a second. That's Falco open source project. And on the right, of course, our Sysdig shovel built, what we're talking about here is built on top of that open source Falco. And then once we're filtering that, those event details can be captured, put in front of an administrator, captured back into a cloud or a back end, and we can then decide, based on that, to take actions. We'll talk about how with Falco, you get the information and then you can build what you want to have happen next. With Sysdig Secure, we have those things, some of those things built in. I'll show you in the demo. So actions and enforcement, and this is kind of looking at this from the rudimentary node container level. So we've got all this information that we can capture. They say system calls never lie, and that's right. What it's doing is what it's doing. All right, so that's all great. So we have all that information. Remember a moment ago I said one of the important things here is we've got to then also add some context to actually get in total what's happening to my application. So we've got all these distributed container workloads on all their various hosts or nodes in Azure, and we've got containers running there. We're capturing at that system call level what's happening. What we want to do is we want to talk to AKS, which is effectively talking to Kubernetes, the Kube API, and we want to add metadata to that. So now we've paired information with location, metadata, and so on and so forth, right? And so with that now, we can kind of ignore the fact that it's node 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can sort of look at it more from a service level. This is what we call, at Sysdig, called service vision. And what it means is I can now look at that data and whatever security incident that happened at a service level, at an app level, pod level, down to the container level, so that then I can answer questions like, show me, or can you, show me security events by namespace and pod. And I show on the right here a part of the Sysdig product where you can sort, filter, apply views based on, in this case, deployments and pods you see there. And so I can see if I'm the Java app owner, if you can actually see that on your screen, I can look into that and say, what are the violations that have happened in my particular namespace in this particular case, right? And then drill down to the pod level, down to the container level, right? So service vision and context is king in order to understand what's happening. But wait, there's more. Of course, there's always more. Now, one of the things that Kubernetes gives us that AKS fully supports is the Kubernetes audit log. So what did that audit log do? It's basically capturing interactions with the Kube API. So if you see the workflow here kind of from left to right and back and forth, right? As a user, as a workload that I've spun up on AKS, there's things happening. Those interactions are registered with the Kube API. That gets into the Kubernetes audit log, right? So what we've done, in addition to what I just talked about, syscalls, we can tap into Kube API activity logs. So remember, context, this actually adds more information, more context. Those things are ingested by our agent, and the agent runs on that Azure node, one per node. And then from that, we can filter, once again, filter those Kubernetes audit log events, check them against our rules, against our policies, right? And so those things are captured back at our back end, the Sysdig Secure DevOps platform, or our SaaS backend, or on-prem, depending on how you're doing it, and kind of filtered out as activity audits or security events that are filtered up, and I'll show you that. So you can do things like at the top here, detect, did someone store credentials, the wrong way? Is someone execing into a pod and modifying things, and where did that start? Where's that happening from? Are users escalating privileges via role-based access controls? So another important piece of the puzzle in terms of understanding this behavior and looking for unexpected, unwanted, right, behavior. And so we can incorporate all those things together, which gives you a much more full and complete and clean picture of your runtime containers and your Kubernetes environment. So the things you've heard me mention, runtime security, what we've been looking at, all this is based on the open source project Falco. Falco was started by Sysdig. It was, however, contributed to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. That's the same place where Kubernetes is and Prometheus and so on. And so it lives on now as a community-driven project. And open source Falco is there for you. You can go to falco.org. And really, the things we were talking about, looking at a system call level, as well as Kubernetes audit logs, you can build your own custom rules or use community-driven rules, or what we will call sort of out of the box, and you can start to implement sort of this visibility into your environment, filtering of what you discover in that environment, and then you would build sort of do-it-yourself responses. So send that to some alerting mechanism, take other actions, and so on. So on top of this project, Sysdig, going back a couple years now, built Sysdig Secure. Again, using the same mechanisms of observing at the kernel level, using Kubernetes audit logs, but giving, and then even having the powerful syntax of building your own rules/policies. But we've also made it super simple with a UI, with policies you can turn on or off, and I'll show you that in a moment. To alert, you can easily click and say, send this to Slack, send it to my email, send it to PagerDuty. You can do things like take steps to stop a threat, remediate. I'll show you that. A lot of out-of-the-box policies. Prevention, you can forward things over to things like Splunk or other kind of security operations center, tool sets that maybe you want to have any kind of information going to, and so on. And so these are the two things that leverage what we've talked about so far and provide that. Okay. So why Sysdig? And we've been talking about it, right? Really, our heritage is based around this idea of giving as complete, as thorough, as accurate information as possible about what's happening with your containers. And we built that on Falco, which I just mentioned. There's a lot of out-of-the-box rules, which saves you time, or you can create your own, because everyone's environment is a bit like a snowflake, regardless of how we like to standardize. So you can do that, right? The breadth is there in terms of giving you various data sources, and this is a growing kind of, I would call it a growing kind of resource where it's just calls, audit logs, there are other data sources we can tap into and that you'll see us talking about in the future. And then this kind of single policy interface, and I'm going to show you that. You really want to get to a point where our security, we've kind of dialed in what we want. Looks like code, it's policies code, but then we just turn it on and we decide where in our environment we want to run it, and away we go. So we go to market with Sysdig Secure as the thing we're talking about today. Sysdig Monitor is more the visibility performance monitoring side, and in total, we call this the Sysdig Secure DevOps platform, because this is all about kind of integrating with your DevOps tool chain and your workflows and to make it easier. All right, real quick customer story, and then I will jump into the demo. I'll look at the time here in just a second. So WorldPay, we just published this case study, but they've been with us for some time. Think about the requirements for a business that's in the payment processing industry, right? Immediately what should come to your mind are things like PCI compliance. So I really need to keep a good handle on my environment, but at the same time, if I'm moving to containers in Kubernetes, how am I going to solve that problem to get the right level of visibility? And so this is what WorldPay has done with Sysdig. I've put here the teams we're working with. So I'm hoping that for some of you listening, you'll go, oh yeah, I'm the container platform engineering team. I totally resonate with this. Or in some cases, it is more of a cloud security team member, like an architect. And so these are the kind of groups we actually worked with. And in our case study, which is on our website, we've interviewed folks from both and kind of tried to understand the story. Well, one is that they are working in cloud environments, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environments, and they really were having difficulty scaling the right kind of visibility for containers in Kubernetes across their different clusters and locations, right? They really were having no way, especially considering the tools that they had in place before, and as they started to adopt containers, they had no way to effectively police what was going on and to audit the activity. And proving PCI compliance was like, it was just a day zero requirement. And so that was their challenge. What did they clearly opted for Sysdig. They're using our SaaS-based solution. And that means it's as easy for them as kind of logging in, and all they do is roll out agents in their environment. And they're getting now this automated runtime analysis that I'm going to show you. and being able to audit what's happening, both from a activity system call level and from a Kubernetes audit level, right? And so for them, what was great about it is that when they recognized the need to do something better, getting started with Sysdig was super simple. Spin up the agent and we start to auto-discover, again, the nature of that system call level, auto-discover the environment and get them on board very quickly. They talked about culture, and the culture was kind of a dividing line between DevOps teams, developers, and security teams, right? But this has helped them sort of bridge the gap. They all speak from sort of the same language now, leveraging the tool sets that they have. And now they're able to kind of prove, and I'll show you some of the PCI pieces in a second in the demo, but improved or simplified getting there for PCI compliance. And when someone says to the business, hey, show us what are your controls, they can do that, and not just the fact they have controls in place, but they're working very well. And so the running around and things that they had to do previously to try and meet the requirements has been reduced somewhat, 50% according to one of the gentlemen over there. So really, if this kind of looks like you and you're looking at this kind of solution, maybe go check out the case study on our website. All right, demo time. So let me bop out of this. I'm looking at my time, looking pretty good. All right, and I'm gonna go to my demo. All right, so what I've done is I've jumped into Sysdig Secure, and you see here you can access secure, monitor, and sort of the lens that you want to see your environment with. And I've jumped directly into the runtime policies section, right? And what this is, these are sort of the out of the box things I was mentioning. And if you look at some of the descriptions here, it might send shivers up your spine, but sensitive info exfiltration, suspicious network tools, launching privileged containers, terminals. So we can turn these things on or off, right? And if we want, or we can do things like, so remember I mentioned PCI. So we have some things that are built out of the box, partly from Sysdig's work, partly from community-driven work, again, from that underlying Falco. These are all based around a rule set, and I'll show you that in a second. But let's go ahead and pick this one because it'll kind of flow through the demo. So let's say I want to monitor my environment for somebody shelling into a container and doing things like running commands. So what does that rule look like? So the rule terminal shell in the container, we can kind of look underneath the hood here a little bit just at a glance. We're looking for the spawning processes, right? A shell process, and kind of outputting, capturing things like what's going on. Where this gets sort of simplified in Sysdig Secure, I'll open this up, is again, the enabling on or off. You can choose what the severity is, and you can dial it into any particular part of your environment. Look, some environments you're going to be perfectly fine with an admin running commands in a container. That may be good, right? But you may also want to, like my Java app, I don't want that to happen there. Or maybe it is important for my entire environment, so I can actually scope that against my entire environment. I can do it more from a host perspective, meaning, hey, for this set of hosts, which is considered the production environment, don't do this, right? Or watch for this rather, right? And so then what can you do? I could take this rule and I can actually modify it. I can create a new rule. Let me just show you real quick. So this library has all of these different pieces that you could potentially add to it. So maybe I want to look for somebody running commands in a container, but I also want to look for, once they're doing that, they're also creating a sensitive mount or something, right? And so we've mapped all of these by adding tags for various compliance standards. Let's see if I can get to the tags here. Yes, various compliance standards and so on. Here are some that are that's very specific to NIST 800-190, NIST 800-53. Let's see if I can find one that is more PCI related. Let's go down here. All right, we have some SOC 2, right? Go MITRE attack framework. And so what we've tried to do is not just give you rules, but tell you kind of if you are needing to police certain activities in your environment and you're subject to, for instance, PCI, you can decide by using some of this insight, right, what to apply and what not to apply, right? And so I'm just clicking through some of these. But anyway, so that kind of gives you insight into the different things that you can use to modify a rule set. And I'm just going to keep flushing back here until I get back to what I was looking for. Maybe I can just hit cancel. That's what I'll do. Now, we can do that. We can apply these rules. We can look, and then we can decide when this happens, what do I want to have happen? So we talked about not just detection, but can I do some prevention or do some things like block, right? And so here we have the ability to kill, stop, and pause. And these are using different mechanisms from really, brute force killing to more elegantly stopping or maybe pausing to quarantine something so that it's still there, but not completely killed, right? So, or you can do nothing. And you can take that action. You can set up your channels that you want to get notified. And you can do things like also create a capture file, right? Here are the notification channels down here. And a capture file, what the heck is that? Well, that is a recording of all of that system call information before, during, and after an incident. What does that give you? Remember I said that, where'd they go? The containers can disappear and leave you with nothing in terms of trying to troubleshoot, do forensics, incident response, and so on. This gives you a recording, and I'll show you in a minute how this shows up. Gives you a recording, a file to go into, to filter, to find the culprit, right? This is one way to do it. So you can then, again, you can set up these policies, these rules at your liking to map to the importance in your environment. And again, you can build your own, you can have them here. Then we're going to be looking for events in the environment, and I've got it filtered. So let's say I'm the Security Operations Center. I've got it filtered to 3 days, but we can just look at 1 day if we want, or the last 12 hours, right? And these are the things that actually triggered. So some of these are driven by information from that system calls. Some of these are driven by information from Kube API. And so I can get into one of these things that happened, right? And it's going to tell me at a fine-grained level, what was this about? What did it violate in terms of your important policies? Where did it happen, right? Down to the deployment name, service name, image repo, and so on. Where did the host did it happen, right? And not only can I do that, but then for these particular issues, and I want to jump into the activity. So we're going to see things change here in a second. Jump into the activity audit, right? And what we're seeing now is that I've got a recording and I've been brought in context directly to this particular issue, right, that happened. And I think I'll view it from right about here. Hopefully you can see that. What we're capturing is file activity, command activity. I don't see any network activity here, but you can get network activity, kubeexec, right? And this is the one where somebody has gone into containers running commands, right? So we see them kind of install SSH, we got them entering, we see them taking down something. I know this one by heart, right? A tar file, untarring it, kind of doing some shady stuff. And then the culmination is running a command to shred their history, right? So we kind of get a picture of what happened. Now that container might be no longer in operation, right? But we still have this information for you. And that helps give you kind of the tracing of what's important and what's happened. Now, this is super cool because as a regulated industry, as an example, WellPay, this is helpful, right? They're able to show the proper controls that are in place. Now, I will try and go back here. And now I just want to show you real quick the capture file. So capture file will have similar information, but a heck of a lot more. So this is a more advanced workflow, but this again is part of that whole forensics idea. What are we looking at? We're looking at a violation of terminal shell in the container. So somebody did something, we know that they ran some commands, so I'm gonna click on that tile. We know that they shredded some history, so they probably deleted some files and other things, right? So we'll just keep it at that for now. Now I see my little hotspot in my before, during, and after sort of right in here. Now it's a ton of information, but by zeroing in on a certain thing, you cut down on that number of information, right? And from here, as an example, I can click on this tile, and now I'm going to get right into, and it'll look an awful lot like what we looked at in the audit, activity audit. But I actually can go even further where, as an example, I see the same thing, sort of reverse order here. But I can even go into this file and look at, and reconstruct contents of what happened in particular, right? And so there's super depth here in terms of getting down to the workload level, the user, the network things going on, the files being touched. And again, come at it a different way. I can do it in printable ASCII, and you can sort of start filtering through to see what the heck was going on here. What did they insert into my environment, right? So just to give you an example, I'm not going to go through a full, smoking gun kind of thing, but it's pretty obvious from here. Okay, so let me just jump back and see in the moments left here what else I may want to show you. All right, so we looked at activity audit, we looked at sort of the policies being set up, we've looked at the events that I can watch for, and I disturbingly have a bunch here, but we've set it up that way. So this is my demo environment, and then we looked at captures. There's one other thing, and this is sort of correlated but not quite related, and when we're thinking about runtime security, one new thing that we introduced, and in a moment, toward the end, I'll invite you to actually try the product. I just wanted to show you that one of the things we most recently turned on has to do with securing networks. And so what I can do is I can, let's say I'm the Java app owner, right? I can start looking at things like egress, ingress, and kind of get a topology, let me do it here, of my network communications that are going on. Now, Kubernetes has a really great mechanism for controlling networks, right? Kubernetes network security policies. And so what are we doing here? So we're trying to give you that insight information that will help you generate the proper and correct policy for your environment to control networks, even within your own, firewall, which we all think of now or talk about as zero trust networking, right? So between ingress and egress, and then what I'll do is I'm going to unclick a couple things here and show you how, first of all, that my map will change with some red lines, right? So what it means is I, as an administrator, can say, you know what, some of this communication is fine. Some of these other things I want to disallow, for reasons that might matter to you and your business. And then I want to generate a policy for that so that I can implement that in my AKS environment. What that means is then I can take this YAML file that's been generated, I can download it, I can apply that to my environment. And actually AKS, Azure, I won't be able to show you here, but it's a super simple interface for applying these kind of things, right? And so what you can do then is get an assist to simplify deploying network security policies. So is this part of runtime security? Well, it is and it isn't, but when we're running, we definitely want to control and understand networks and network behavior as well. That's all I'm going to show there, but just since it's a new feature, I thought I would jump into it really quickly. And so I think that what you'll find with whether you're using open source Falco, whether you're using the full-blown Sysdig Secure, that you'll find very effective in terms of helping you secure your environment in a way that potentially today you're not able to do. Okay, so I'm going to flip back to my final couple slides here, and then I'm going to, when I get there, we'll take a breather and have Charlene help me wrap it up. So my wrap-up, one of my wrap-up slides, Sysdig Secure DevOps platform, right? We've talked about the open source heritage and the underpinnings there, the center of my circle on the left. Our goal is to give you deep visibility, right? Because we want, as people are moving into this world, it's still new. It's new to many of us, right? And that's partly why Azure and Microsoft have this way of take the headaches of operating a Kubernetes cluster off of you, and you focus on your applications. And that's great. And then what we want to do is layer into that to give you the visibility around what's happening. So you can say, I know that things are secure, I know they're running well, and so on, right? And then we also want to give you the ability to scale. many of the customers that start with us, they're kind of tiger teams that are deploying their first few apps, and then boom, they hit the inflection point and start to grow. And so we are well known, at least across our customers and our partners, as the scalable solution. So I think from that standpoint, if you envision, starting at 50 nodes and growing quickly to 5,000, that you can ride that wave along with Sysdig, or we can ride it along with you, rather, right? And then we're trying to make sure that we have the integrations that you need. So integrating into your CI/CD tool sets, integrating into your runtime environments, integrating into your security, visibility, SIEM solutions, right? And so you'll find that if you visit us and take a look around our website, you'll find that we've done a pretty good job of partnering, all about helping you secure containers, Kubernetes, AKS in this point, and cloud services. All right. So what's next? What's next is going to be Q&A, but I invite you to take a test drive, and it's super simple to get started. In fact, within minutes, hopefully you have an environment to take advantage of it with. Within minutes, you'll have a login to go give it a try. And so I've included the simplified URL here. We just finished publishing what we call our security and monitoring guide for Azure Container Services. It really speaks to Azure, to what they do from a security and monitoring perspective, and how Sysdig complements that. So I'd encourage you, you can go to our page there, and right at the top is a link to download that. And then before I pause here for questions, I just invite you to, you're on our website, to go under the resources, pull down, and you'll see the opportunity to look for additional ways to join us or get more information. All right, Charlene, let me take a quick breather and let me have you take the floor for a moment, please.
All right, great. Well, now is a good time. If you have a question for Eric, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question there. We have plenty of time for questions, so go ahead and don't be shy. Just go ahead and send them on in. Eric, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and throw the first question at you.
All right, why don't you go ahead, and I'm just going to take a sip of coffee while you're asking, if that's okay.
Okay, here you go then. Does Sysdig work for on-prem deployments?
Great question. You heard me talking a lot about SaaS. So do we work for on-prem deployments? The answer is yes. These days, we often try and substitute on-prem wording with self-hosted. And why do we do that? We do that because you may not be running with a public cloud service like AKS, but you may have your own part of Azure and your own private systems, and you can deploy the Sysdig, let's call it, bits, and manage the entire thing itself. So there's really two pieces. There's agent, there's backend, right? Agent collecting, doing some of the enforcement, etc. The backend is where it all comes together, where you can look at it, you can view it, you can slice it, you can dice it, right? And so both are possible, as well as in your own physical data center, your colo location. I will say that the majority of our customers are getting more and more comfortable with this idea of cloud. Just give me a login, and by the way, we've worked to get people more comfortable by going through compliance certifications like SOC 2 and so on, and that information as well is on our website. Good question.
Cool. All right, next question. Is the product available only for Azure platforms?
The answer is no, and in fact, but we do love Microsoft, we do love Azure. You might have seen in my demo that there are some other kind of cloud environments showing up as well, right? And so it's available for cloud environments, like what Amazon provides, like what Google provides. We work with OpenShift, Red Hat, right? And Red Hat OpenShift runs on Azure. We work with Rancher. Rancher can run anywhere, run on Azure. And so it's available, really, we're multi-cloud, hybrid cloud in the sense that, and if you do a trial, you can actually try this, right? I can roll out an agent to observe a node. One node might be over here, one node might be over there, two different clouds. All that information, if I put in my correct key, let's call it, is all going to come back together. The metadata is going to make sure I know what belongs to what. And so available well beyond Azure platforms. Again, best way to do that is to jump onto our website and check that out. But we're definitely seeing growing momentum with Azure with AKS.
All right, excellent. Okay, guys, plenty of time for questions. If you do have a question for Eric, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. Let's see, here's another one for you. What are some of the things I should look for to meet PCI compliance with containers?
Excellent question. And I'm not a PCI compliance expert, but the fact that we have built some of it in, I am, let's call it conversant. So when we think about any of these compliance requirements, there's no one tool that's going to get you all the way there. But I know that because we went through this ourselves with SOC 2, let's say, a lot of it's about implementing controls, proving that you implemented those controls, right? And being able to audit, sustain an audit of that, right? And so when we're thinking about PCI and containers, actually, just as an aside, because it just came to my brain, we see how we have that guide there. We have a guide about PCI with containers on our website, and it goes through section by section, sort of the guidance for PCI for payment card industry is, I guess, what that stands for, right? It's about protecting credit card information. Excuse me. We have a guide there you can get, but some of it's about how do you protect the files, how do you protect access, how do you prevent unwanted or unauthorized access. You can imagine it sort of spans all the things that have to do with making sure that there is no unauthorized access and exposure for the customers for whom you are sort of guarding or using or storing their credit card information. We've tried to put that from an image scanning, from a runtime security perspective, codify that what we can do to help there into rules that you can click off and apply to your environment. But there's a lot there. I'd encourage you to go find that guide. You can probably search PCI guide Sysdig and find that.
Excellent. Excellent. That sounds like a really good resource, actually.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. All right. All right. So we have one more question here. So I invite folks, if you do have a question, now's the time to go ahead and get it on into the control panel. And hopefully we'll get a couple more before we close out the question and answer period. But here's the next question. What does it take to install Sysdig? To answer that about installation, from a SaaS perspective, again, I'm just going to sign up for an account. I need to roll out an agent. Well, how do I do that? I always tell the stories when I first got hired here at Sysdig, but keep in mind my title is marketing, but they said, we want to see that you can do this, right? And so I downloaded Docker and I just spun up the Sysdig container, and boom, I was connected and it was monitoring the system I was running on. So it's that simple. Right, really runs as a container, but in an environment, let's say I have a 50 node environment, and I want to spin that up. I don't have to go on each one of those and do a Docker run. You can actually deploy this with a Helm chart, which is kind of an automated way to put things out. Operator, we call things in the Red Hat world, or a daemon set, right? Which is a Kubernetes way of making sure that every node that spins up has certain things running. Sysdig can do that with AKS, right, as a daemon set, and make sure that it gets on across all your nodes, and so that it's up and running. Now, when it comes to like self-hosted on-prem, now you're talking about deploying a backend as well. And so that's a little bit more involved, just in the sense that you've got it, we give you ways to get that data, capture that data, store that data, query that data, and those things need to run on a set of, virtual machines or nodes or cloud nodes or whatnot. So that kind of information, frankly, you can just go to docs.sysdig.com and get more information on that. But agent, super simple. All right, great. Here's another question that just came. Oh, questions are coming in now. Okay, does Sysdig work for WSL2 on Linux, runtime on Windows 10 or server?
Aha, that's an interesting one, because you're talking about combining, and I don't know the answer, and that's fine, but maybe this is one we can follow up on, because the question is, it's a Linux runtime running on Windows 10 or server. does the Linux runtime have kind of the look and feel of Linux in the sense that we can understand that system call activity in the way that we understand it today? Then the answer would be yes. But obviously Windows and Linux kind of had different ways, right? Different kernels. And so to date, in terms of pure Windows, not supported from this standpoint. But I think what I want to do is kind of do a little more research on this and then get back to the questioner. But it's interesting to know that this is kind of one of the things that's being done out there.
Yeah. So Mario, I'm sure somebody from Sysdig will be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get a deeper, better answer to your question. So stay tuned. Hopefully Eric or somebody from Sysdig will be able to get that information for you shortly and follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, let's see. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, so we'll just keep going, but there's time. If you do have a question, go ahead and submit it. Here's another one that just came in. Do you have performance benchmarks for machine sizing and capacity, etc.?
Yeah, yes, I'll refer again to docs.sysdig.com. I think if you look in the agent installation part, plus it's there for the more broader self-hosted. There's some information there. It's like a rough rule of thumb. It's gonna be roughly 3% or something of your CPU memory, etc. But in terms of the agent, right, performance or consumption, I should say, not necessarily performance. But that's so variable, especially when we think about, I can have a very small machine or I can have a very large machine and so on. But we do give some guidance in our docs, and I would point you there for at least the first stop. Above and beyond that, and again, depends on how many containers you're running, what's the size of your cluster, are you running the Kubernetes control plane, are you not running the Kubernetes, are you just doing something more like AKS? So I'll take the easy way out and say it would be irresponsible for me to give you a full answer, but but you know what I mean. But we definitely got right in there some percentage and information to give you some rule of thumb.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure that Wilson can probably find that on the website, and if it's not what he needs, then I'm sure there's a way to get in touch with somebody from Sysdig to get that information. So okay, all right, great. So we are about 7 minutes to the top of the hour, and we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, probably just one. But right now we don't have any more questions. So I'm going to leave the question and answer tab open to see if we do get any last minute stragglers coming in. And while we are waiting, I'll just remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, especially for those demos, I love those demos, you will have the opportunity to do so. So we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can go find it there as well. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, doesn't look like we're getting any more questions in, so I'll go ahead and cut off the question and answer period. But like I said, if you do have a question, you could still use the GoToWebinar control panel and get it in. The folks at Sysdig will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in, answered and non-answered. And if your question was not answered during the webinar, they will be more than happy to follow up with you offline, as well as those questions such as Mario's that need further clarification. So so Eric, you've got some homework to do. So.
It's good. I always learn by a question.
Excellent. All right, well, before we shut things down, I did mention at the top of the hour we'd be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's see, our first winner today is Stephen R. Congratulations, Stephen. Second winner today is Tom W. Congratulations, Tom. Third winner today is Wilson M. Congratulations, Wilson. And our final winner
Wilson
today
asked the
is
question, so that's double.
yeah,
Double.
that's right. Had no impact at all, but we'll just put that out there. Really does not. It's totally random. Last winner today is Linda G. Congratulations, Linda. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. If you don't see anything in your inbox from us, please check your spam folder. All right, well, Eric, thanks so much again, as always, for a great presentation, lots of great stuff. And, you know, judging by the questions that came in, there were some, there's a lot of audience participation there, so a lot of interest. So thanks again, really appreciate your expertise and your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. All right. Also want to thank the audience for joining me, as always. But for now, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.